Hey there, leaders at Alpine Church. Here is your sermon preview video for the weekend of January 13th. We are in week 2 of our Nehemiah series, and this week is all about moving forwards. Let me just give you kind of a quick summary of where we're going to be going this week. Brian is going to do the sermon intro. In the intro, he'll kind of do a recap of the big picture of the series and a week 1 recap, and then the transition is going to be the end of chapter 1 ends with this kind of humorous statement after Nehemiah makes this big grand declaration of what he's going to do. He's going to go rebuild the walls. He ends that by saying, "I was cupbearer to the king." Now this is kind of ironic because he could have said, it would have made a lot more sense if he had said, "I'm going to go build these walls because I'm a general contractor or because I'm a mason and I know how to build walls." But he doesn't say that. He's a cupbearer. He probably doesn't know the last thing about building a wall. And so what's interesting about that is that didn't stop him from taking on this grand vision. There's probably a lot of people out there that say, "Hey, I've heard about this big eternal purpose. That's great, but come on, man, I'm just a regular guy. I don't really know how to be a part of this big purpose or vision, whatever. I might even be kind of on the fringes here at this church. What can I really do to be a part of this grand eternal purpose we were talking about last week?" But so kind of the question we're going to be wrestling with is, okay, now that my heart has been broken, we talked about that last week for the lost and my complacency in this, really what can I do about it? Where do I really go from here? And that's where Nehemiah is great. We talked about this a little bit last week, but we're going to emphasize is that Nehemiah didn't just have his heart broken and then sit back and hope that it all worked out. No, when his heart was broken, he committed to action. Even though he was just a cupbearer and not a wall builder, he knew he needed to do something, so he committed to action. And so chapter 2 is where we see that action start to play out. Now, chapter 2 is kind of a long chapter. It's 19 verses. We're not going to look at all of them, but I'm going to kind of go through and do a recap. We'll do kind of a recap of the story. Here's just some, in brief terms, kind of a recap of the story. What happens is he goes to the king, and he looks very sad, and the king says, "What's your deal? Why do you look sad?" And Nehemiah says, "Well, it's because the city of my forefathers lies in ruins. It's ruined." And the king says, "Well, what do you want me to do?" And so Nehemiah says, "Send me to that city so that I can rebuild it." And he says, kind of shockingly, well, it pleased the king to do so. And so the king agrees to send him to do that, and so he went on his way. But Nehemiah was even more bold, and he said, "Can I ask one other favor? Can you actually also give me some free some letters so that I can get free passage there, so these the guys who don't like me won't mess with me?" And he said, "And one other thing, can you also give me some timber from your forest so that I can build these walls together?" So these are pretty audacious requests he makes to the king, but amazingly, the king grants him his request, and so he goes to Jerusalem. And what he does is, after being there for a couple days, he gets some guys together and he goes out and he begins to inspect the walls of Jerusalem. And he describes how he goes around and he checks out what was going on in the walls, and it's bad. Even so that the donkeys riding on can't even make it around because the walls are in such a heap. And he goes through and describes all these places and how bad things were, and he describes the dire nature of the situation there. And then he goes back to the guys in Jerusalem and says, "Okay, the trouble we're in." And so he says this, "Come on, let's rebuild the walls of Jerusalem." And they replied, "Let's go for it." And so it ends there. We're going to end in verse 19. So they began this good work. So after kind of telling the story here, we're going to pause and say, so what does Nehemiah teach us then? If our hearts have been broken and we recognize that God has put us on this earth for this big eternal purpose, where do I go from here? We're going to learn from Nehemiah in this chapter. Here's a few things we learned from him about where do we go from here. One is we need to evaluate, and we see that in the story where Nehemiah takes time to walk the perimeter, and we'll kind of describe that in the passage, how he walked around Jerusalem to really try to understand the situation. And it's interesting in the passage, goes into great detail about where he walked in and how he really took in what was really going on, because he recognized before he could really solve a problem, he really had to understand what the problem was. And so that teaches us we need to walk the perimeter of our own life. And so, by the way, throughout the sermon, we're going to be trying to talk on two different levels. What does all this mean for us as individuals, but also what does it mean for us corporately as a church? And so we'll kind of be going back and forth on this. And so we're going to say, corporately, we've done this. We've walked the perimeter as a church, and we've recognized, where we need to grow as a church, what some of our obstacles are, what are some of the challenges we need to overcome if we're going to move forward in the next several years. And so we'll talk about that a little bit, and then we'll say, but what about you? Have you taken time personally to ask yourself these questions? Are you pursuing God first, like we talked about the first aspect of the purpose last week, but also, are you really helping others pursue God? And again, the idea is we want to, again, ask people to kind of take stock of themselves, of their lives. So once you evaluate the situation, walk the perimeter, the next thing we need to do, we learn from Nehemiah, is make a plan. Don't just say, wow, things are bad. Make a plan to do something. And so Nehemiah does that, and he begins to share his purpose and share his plans with others, and he enlists their help. Not only does he make the plan, but he says, hey, we got to get you guys involved in this. And so, again, we'll talk about how corporately we recognize this. We have this plan, and that you're part of our church as you're sitting there, and we need you to be a part of this if we're going to be successful. And so here is where we're going to start to lay out, just in real brief form, our vision for the next several years at Alpine Church. And so we're going to say, as we've thought about this, what's our plan as a church? Here is our plan. Just like Nehemiah made a plan, here is our plan. And we're calling it 10 by 20. And you'll be hearing a lot more about this over the next several weeks and months, and as we focus on this. But this is our plan at Alpine Church, 10 by 20. And what that means is we want to help 10,000 people be pursuing God by the year 2020. We'll talk about how right now we're helping about 2,700 to 3,000 people pursue God at our church, and that's great. We're excited about that, but we believe there are so many more lost people, so many more people that need God along the Wasatch Front. So our vision is to be helping 10,000 people pursue God on a regular basis by the year 2020. So we're calling it 10 by 20. And we're just going to, again, talk real briefly about this. This is just kind of the initial laying out of this vision. We're going to be talking about the details more in the next few weeks. But we're going to lay out briefly how we think we're going to accomplish this plan. We're going to talk about adding more services at existing campuses. We're going to talk about our online services. We're going to talk about new and better strategic partnerships with other churches in the area. And we're going to talk about planting new campuses. These are all practical ways that we corporately are going to be a part of accomplishing this vision that God has put in our heart of doing this work. And again, we're going to talk about it corporately, but then we're also going to say, now, you have an element in this also, and we'll be talking about that more in coming weeks. What does this mean for you to be a part of this? How are we going to reach this goal, this plan together? And hopefully, we'll say at the end of point 2, that your response will be just like Nehemiah's people's response was, where they said, all right, let's go for it. And then last, we're going to say this. We're going to kind of wrap it all up by saying, now, we don't want to paint some rosy picture. The reality is, once you make a plan and start implementing it, there's going to be challenges. And there was a lot of challenges for Nehemiah. And next week, or in subsequent weeks, we're going to talk specifically about what some of those challenges are. But we want to talk about the very real condition that this is kind of scary, and there's risk involved. And we'll talk about how Nehemiah, this was a risk for him. It said at the beginning he was afraid when he first went to the king, and because he didn't really know what was going on. He didn't know how big of a project this really was, but that didn't stop him. He took the first step. And so we're going to say, hey, we don't have this all figured out, and there's risk involved in this, and we don't know exactly how this is all going to play out, but we don't want to just sit back and do nothing. We want to move forward like Nehemiah did. And so we're taking a step, and we hope that you will be a part of this. And so that's kind of a big picture for where we are going. Some good close ideas, I think, are to kind of maybe bring it back to what we talked about at the beginning. Now, as you hear about all these plans and this stuff, maybe you're thinking, man, I'm just a regular Joe. I'm just a cupbearer like Nehemiah. What can I do? And that's where we'll again hint at, there's going to be plenty of practical ways for you to get involved, but the most important thing is you say, yes, I'm going to do something. I'm going to be involved in this eternal purpose. Even if I'm just a cupbearer, I can do something. And then, of course, we want to bring it around to the gospel at the end. This will be mainly a sermon geared toward the Christian, but we always want to be sensitive to the non-Christian there. And so at the end, we want to say, now this is a big, exciting, eternal vision that we have to reach people, but before you can be a part of some big eternal purpose, you first have to get your own eternity in place. You've got to start a relationship with God and then get to the gospel. So that is kind of a summary of where we're going. I hope that is helpful. Again, we're not going to try to get into great detail about the 10 by 20 vision. We're going to be laying at that more over the next weeks and stuff, but we just kind of wanted to tease them a little bit and get it out there. So if you have more questions about this and want to talk about it, feel free to contact me, Steve at alpinechurch.org, about the sermon or one of the other pastors, and we'd be glad to try to help you out. And we think it'll be a great week. So God bless you guys. Take care.